Celtic Badass of the Week showcases a different badass person of Celtic heritage each week. Those who exemplify the give no shit attitude and come out on top. They may come from our past or our present, but rest assured they come from all walks of life and legend. They are men, women, even old ladies and pirate queens. You don't have to be a muscled up Celt in a fur kilt swinging a mighty sword. You can just be a 4'11" Welsh woman and suffragette who knows jujitsu. Most of these badasses are all too real. While some may be only legend, badass legends though. The only prerequisite for this title is Celtic blood and badassedness.
Micheal Collins. On the evening of August 22, 1922, a small military convoy carrying 31-year-old Micheal Collins was driving along the war-torn roads near his childhood home in County Cork, Ireland. Collins was deeply troubled. What should have been the happiest summer of his life had turned into the most tragic. The previous December, Collins had helped negotiate a treaty with which Britain, after 750 years of occupation, had finally agreed to withdraw from the 26 counties of Southern Ireland. Now, Collins had waged the most gruesome, badass guerrilla war upon the British that occupied Ireland at that time, and he was so brutal and cunning that he brought the entire British Empire to its knees. Within a few months of the treaty, however, Ireland was engulfed in a civil war in which the Irish Free State Army, which supported the treaty, was fighting the Irish Republican Army, which opposed it, for failing to include the 6 northern counties. In an attempt to put an end to the war, Collins, who had been the IRA's Director of Intelligence, and who was now the Commander-in-Chief of the Irish Free State Army, had gone to Cork to speak to the IRA leaders to put an end to the bloodshed and work towards peace and prosperity for everyone. This Irish badass literally walked into the lion's den wearing a meat suit. When asked about the dangers, Collins replied that my own fellow countrymen won't kill me. He knew he was wrong, but he held on to the hope that the same men who he had fought side by side with would see that he was a force for good. Sadly, he was wrong. As the lightly armored convoy made its way to the lonely Irish roads, Collins was killed in an IRA ambush. The repercussions of that evening are still being felt in Ireland to this day. Now, although his image as a legendary and romantic hero or a prototypical terrorist depends on one's point of view, there is a little disagreement over Micheal Collins being a tragic figure in the end. As the military and political genius behind the IRA's fight for Irish independence, he led a small force of guerrillas to fight the mighty British Empire, and he did so to a stalemate and forced them to the negotiating table. The tactics that he developed and perfected caused him to be widely regarded as the father of 20th century urban guerrilla warfare. Future revolutionaries such as Vladimir Lenin, Mao Zedong, and Yitzhak Shamir studied and adapted Collins' tactics. In fact, Shamir admired Collins' badassery so much that he used the codename Micheal during his Israeli War of Independence. During his time as a young man, working in London, he became endeared in the Irish cause and became a member of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, a secret organization dedicated to Irish independence. Now, he remained in London until 1960, when he returned to Ireland to help fight in the Easter Rebellion, which was planned and organized by the IRB. During the Rising, Collins served as aide-de-camp to one of its leaders, Joseph Mary Plunkett. Now, the Easter Rebellion started on Monday, 24th, 1916, and the last rebels surrendered on Saturday, April 29th. The leaders were all executed, and hundreds of participants, including Collins, were sent to an internment camp in Wales. Collins was released later as part of a general amnesty. During his incarceration, he studied past Irish insurrections and analyzed why they had always failed. He concluded that the fatal flaw of each of them had been a lack of organization and fighting the British on their own terms. The next rebellion would succeed because he would lead it, and he would run it his way. He had plenty of time to figure out what tactics would send the most fear into the hearts of the British, and he planned to implement them as soon as freaking possible. When Collins returned to Ireland, he found several organizations dedicated to establishing an Irish Republic, the Irish Volunteers, which was the forerunner of the IRA, Sinn Féin, and of course the IRB. Over the next few years, Callans would play major roles in all three organizations. By summer of 1918, Callans was elected president of the IRB. Callans was elected to the Sinn Féin Executive Council, and Callans became Adjutant General of the Irish Volunteers in March 1918. So he was a popular dude in the Irish Rebellion, movement. Now, he also became Director of Intelligence for the Volunteers. Now, it was as Director of Intelligence, though, that Callans established a vast intelligence network that operated throughout Ireland and England that would make the modern CIA jealous as shit. He had spies and informers everywhere, including the police, the British Army, and even Dublin Castle, which was the British administrative center in Ireland. Now, his spies allowed him to intercept British messages, and there were numerous occasions where Callans had copies of British orders before they reached the intended recipient. Callans was eventually arrested in Dublin for a speech that he had given in County Longford. He posted bail and went on the run. During the next 3 years, he was the most wanted man in Ireland. On May 18th, the British arrested the leadership of Sinn Féin, including De Valera, leaving Callans to assume almost total control of the Republican movement. A few years later, in addition to his duties with the IRA, Callans was appointed Minister of Finance for the Dáil. But he was not present for its first meeting. He was in England at the time working on a plot to spring Eamon de Valera out of Lincoln jail. The plot proved successful, and on February 3, 1919, Callans personally participated in de Valera's escape. Now, Callans was back in Dublin by March 29th, and he organized a mass escape of about 20 prisoners from Mountjoy Prison. Now, on the night of April 7th, 1919, Callans, with the assistance of one of his spies, sneaked into G Division headquarters, which is British intelligence, and spent the night examining top-secret files. Now, after viewing them, Callans concluded that the key to defeating Britain was to cripple its intelligence network. He decided that without her spies, Britain was helpless. He also realized that spies are less willing to replace spies that have been killed, and that, even if Britain could find replacements, the new spies would not have the previous spies' knowledge. Therefore, Callans began a sustained and systematic attack on both the RIC, the Royal Irish Constabulary, and G Division. Okay, to fight the RIC, Callans used the IRA flying columns, small but highly mobile guerrilla groups of poorly armed men, usually no more than 30. On April 20th, 1990, the IRA staged its first raid on an RIC barracks, seizing rifles and ammunitions. During the next few months, the IRA intensified its attacks on the RIC. As a result, some of the smaller RIC barracks were closed, and the troops were transferred to larger barracks in the cities and towns. To fight G Division, in July 1919, Callans organized a small group of young volunteers assigned to the IRA's intelligence department, simply known as the Squad, whose mission was to assassinate detectives and other British spies, and to do it with impunity, meaning only the most loyal and ruthless were chosen to be in the Squad. The Squad usually gave potential targets a warning, and if they responded by performing their duties less zealously, they were spared. However, those who failed to heed the warnings were killed, no exceptions. Now, the British declared war on Callans. Dublin police responded by sacking Sinn Féin headquarters. Callans, who was president at this time, escaped when the police did not recognize him. Over the years, he had avoided having his picture taken and being seen in public in order to keep his identification hidden. He even fomented misinformation about his appearance in order to confuse those who sought him. Now, unwilling to let the raid on the Sinn Féin headquarters go unavenged, Callans ordered the Squad to kill one of its leaders, Detective Daniel Hoey. That very same night, as a result of the IRA attacks, many RIC and DMP, Dublin Municipal Police members, took early retirement, while many others became visibly enthusiastic in performing their duties. In an effort to restore order, the British sent in reinforcements from England. The first unit, which would become known as the Black and Tans, arrived in Ireland on March 25, 1920. In September of 1920, the British sent additional 1,500 veteran British Army officers known as auxiliary cadets, or Auxies as they called them, to help the Black and Tans in the guerrilla war. Although precise numbers are hard to determine, most historians agree that even at the height of the Black and Tan War, the IRA had only about 3,000 active members fighting more than 50,000 British soldiers, 1,500 Black and Tans, and 10,000 RIC and 1,500 auxiliaries. Moreover, even in County Cork, which is probably the IRA's strongest area, the IRA only had about 300 active members fighting, more than 12,500 British troops. That's outnumbered. One of the things that caused the British to fear Collins the most was the relentlessness and success which he tracked down his enemies. For example, when the Irish was being rounded up at the end of the Easter Rebellion, Collins saw one of the British officers, Leigh Wilson, mistreat one of the prisoners, including its eldest leader, 58-year-old Thomas Clark. Collins remembered the incident and swore to avenge it. Then, in June 1920, more than 4 years after the Rising, Collins learned that Wilson was working as an RIC district inspector in Gorey, a small town in County Wexford. So on June 15th, Collins had Wilson killed. Another RIC district commissioner, Ferguson Smith, had advocated to shoot on-site policy against the IRA. Commissioner Smith was tracked down and killed by the IRA on July 18th, when the Lord Mayor of Cork, Thomas McCurtain, who was also the leader of Cork No. 1 Brigade of the IRA, was killed by the British on March 20th, 1920. Collins learned that the RIC District Inspector Oswald Ross Swansea was one of those responsible. The British, in an effort to protect Swansea from IRA reprisals, transferred Swansea from Cork, which in the southernmost part of Ireland, to Lisburn in the north. However, Collins's vast intelligence network was able to track down Swansea, and a special hit team was dispatched to kill him. They achieved their objective on August 22nd, as Swansea was coming out of church. Now Collins, his degree of badassery is epic. By his actions, he let everyone know that vengeance would be his, no matter how far you run. Late in the year, the British sent numerous Secret Service agents to Dublin in an attempt to infiltrate the IRA high command and to kill or capture Collins. Those agents became known as the Cairo Gang because they had previously been working in Cairo. Because of his own intelligence network, Collins learned about the plot and he was able to identify many of the agents. Once they were identified, Collins launched a preemptive attack, and on the morning of Sunday, November 21st, the squad attacked simultaneously throughout Dublin and, according to different accounts, assassinated at least 13 and possibly as many as 20 British spies or soldiers. In retaliation, the British drove an armored tank to a Gaelic football match at Croke Park in Dublin later that day and fired into the crowd, killing 13 fans and 1 player. The day's events would forever be remembered in Irish history as Bloody Sunday. Now that December, the British sent out word that they were looking for peaceful resolution of the Irish situation. However, the British insisted that the IRA would have to surrender its weapons before any talks could begin. Of course, Collins rejected that demand. On May 25, 1921, the IRA launched its biggest operation of the war, when 120 men attacked and burned the custom house in Dublin. It proved to be a costly operation, with 6 IRA men being killed, 12 wounded, and 70 captured. Despite its apparent failure, however, the attack did have a decisive psychological impact on London. And on June 22nd, King George V, in a speech in Belfast, proposed peace talks, and on July 11th, a truce was declared. Treaty negotiations started in London on October 21st, Among the British negotiators were David Lloyd George and Winston Churchill. Eamon de Valera sent Collins as one of the 5 Irish delegates. Collins strongly objected. However, once Collins became a member of the treaty delegation, he was totally committed to working for a peaceful solution. During the negotiations, Collins, a devout Catholic, arose early each morning to attend daily Mass, which really pissed off all those Protestants. Now, after more than 6 weeks, the parties reached a compromise agreement, and on the morning of December 6th, although the treaty did not provide for a complete and free Irish Republic, it did create the 26-county Irish Free State, which had Dominion status, leaving the 6 counties of Northern Ireland as part of Great Britain. As Lord Birkenhead signed the treaty on behalf of the British delegation, he remarked, "I may have signed my political death warrant tonight." Collins, realizing that many die-hard IRA members would oppose any compromise with Britain, grimly replied, "I may have signed my actual death warrant." The proposed treaty still needed to be ratified by the Dáil. Now, it was approved on January 7, 1922, by a vote of 64 to 57. Such a clear divide echoed that civil war was inevitable. And the Irish Civil War started on June 28, 1922, when the Irish Free State Army attacked the Four Courts and swiftly seized control of Dublin. The IRA, however, controlled much of southern and western Ireland. Once the Civil War started, Collins became commander-in-chief of the Irish Free State's National Army. Over the next few weeks, the Free State Army drove the IRA from its strongholds. And on August 20th, Collins left Dublin for Cork. He arrived later that evening and spent the next day meeting with commanders. On August 22nd, he departed the city to tour western Cork, and around 7:30 p.m., his small convoy entered a little valley called Ballin-na-Blah, which was only about 15 miles from where he had been born. The small group of IRA men had heard that Collins was in the area and set an ambush for him. Shots rang out from the hillside, and in the short gun duel that ensued, Collins fell dead. It was the supreme irony that the man who had perfected guerrilla warfare and who had escaped death numerous times at the hands of the British would be killed in a guerrilla ambush by his former comrades in his home county. The Civil War continued until May of 23, when the IRA declared a ceasefire. Now, even though the Irish Free State Army had clearly won, the IRA never officially surrendered. One is only left to speculate what badass Micheal Collins would have been able to accomplish had he lived and been able to govern Ireland through peacetime. It is safe to say that the course of Anglo-Irish relations would have been much different had he lived, and that perhaps the problems of Northern Ireland would have been solved long ago.